Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Chicago Public Library's Women's History Month opening program. My name is Beth Locke, and I'm an archivist at Chicago Public Library's Vivian G. Harsh research collection of Afro-American history and literature. It is the largest collection of African-American history and literature in the Midwest. This repository houses panelist Dr. Toni M. Bond's archival papers. A display on Dr. Bond's reproductive justice activism will be on display in Carter G. Woodson Regional Library beginning this week. Please stop by and view the display in our lobby. We're located in the Washington Heights neighborhood at the corner of 95th and Halsted. Today's panel discussion, the Illinois Reproductive Health Act and the War on Women's Choice, History, Policy, and Practice, is generously co-sponsored by the Chicago Women's History Center. During our program, please post any questions or comments you may have during the program into the chat box or into the Q&A box at the bottom. Now, I would like to introduce Marianne Johnson, President of the Chicago Women's History Center, to give an overview of the center's important work to document the achievements of local women.
Thank you, Beth. Hello, everyone, and welcome. As Beth said, this is Marianne Johnson, and I'm speaking to you from the Chicago Women's History Center here in Logan Square. We're delighted to see such a terrific turnout for this Women's History Month event, and we want to thank the Chicago Public Library for co-sponsoring it with us. And we also want to thank all of you for joining today for what we're sure is going to be a fascinating and timely discussion about Illinois' Reproductive Health Act and its impact on women's choice and reproductive justice, not only in Illinois, but throughout the Midwest. This is a big year for the Chicago Women's History Center as we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. It's hard to believe, but 50 years ago, CWHC was founded by a small group of women as the Chicago Area Women's History Conference, a pioneer organization at the time. Over the years, we've seen many changes, but we continue our mission of documenting, preserving, and sharing Chicago women's history. And today, CWHC is the oldest continuing nonprofit women's history organization in the United States. But we couldn't have done this without your help. As a nonprofit, CWHC relies on memberships and donations to bring you programs such as this one this afternoon. Many of you out there have been members of CWHC through the years. We want you to know that we greatly appreciate your support and hope you will continue to renew. If you aren't a member, please join us. There's a link in the chat to the membership page on our website. And since it's our 50th anniversary, please consider a special donation to CWHC. There's a link in the chat for that too. This year, we'll be celebrating our 50th year in a variety of ways. Please stay tuned and engage to find out more. We need your support to begin our next half century. And now I want to turn this over to one of our great board members, Judith Singleton, who is chair of our program committee and has organized today's event. Judith is a cultural and medical anthropologist. She holds a master's degree from Yale University and a Ph.D. from Northwestern in anthropology. Judith will be introducing and moderating today's panel. So welcome, Judith.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Marianne. I'm Judith Singleton, and yes, I'm a member of the Chicago Women's History Center's board. I want to thank you all for attending our 2022 Women's History Month event today on the Reproductive Health Act of Illinois and the War on Women's Choice, History, Policy, and Practice. Before we get started with our panel, I want to thank everybody on the board, especially Marianne Johnson, who you just met, Beth Locke, who helped me put this program together and convince Chicago Public Libraries to co-sponsor this event. I also want to thank Jennifer Dento, who is also a board member, helping us with the tech. She's going to be feeding me the questions in the chat. And I also want to thank our members of the programming committee, Lisa Burnell, Jennifer Dento, Marianne Johnson, Lori Little, and Rana Siegel for all your suggestions and work on organizing this event. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to set our topic in context and provide some brief background information and introduce our 4 esteemed panelists. To start the conversation, I'm going to ask a question in which each panelist will respond. And then we're going to take questions from the audience. So as Beth mentioned, please write your questions in the chat function, and then I will read them in the order they're received. You can specify a particular panelist that you would like to respond to the question, or, you know, if you would like all 4 of them to respond, that's fine too. So, in 2019, the Illinois State Legislature passed the Reproductive Health Act, which protects safe and legal abortions for women, despite the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Illinois is one of 6 states that passed legislation maintaining safe and legal access to abortion services, while other states, particularly those surrounding Illinois, have legislated restrictions. Our conversation today focuses on both reproductive rights and reproductive justice. And I want to provide just some definitions because they are different. When we talk about reproductive rights, we're talking about those rights centered around the right to legal access to obtain reproductive health care services, such as abortion and birth control. But reproductive justice links reproductive rights with the social, political, and economic inequalities that affect a woman's ability to access reproductive health care services. Core components of reproductive justice include equal access to safe abortion, affordable contraceptives, and comprehensive sex education, as well as freedom from sexual violence. On December 1st, 2021, the 9 justices on the United States Supreme Court listened to arguments in the case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. This case before the Supreme Court challenges the Mississippi law that bans all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, and that's a little after 3 months. And it opposes the precedent Roe v. Wade that was passed in 1973, legalizing abortion in the United States. Many fear that Roe will be eviscerated or completely overturned, and 22 states will move to ban or substantially restrict access to abortion. The court is expected to announce its decision about Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health sometime before the end of the term, which is in June. If the court overturns Roe, it will be the first time in our nation's history a constitutional right has been rescinded. So while this was going on in the Supreme Court in December, here in Illinois in December 21, Governor Pritzker signed legislation to repeal a requirement that parents or guardians be notified by Planned Parenthood when a minor is seeking an abortion. Effective January 1st, 2024, this measure repeals a 1995 act requiring a parent or guardian be notified at least 48 hours in advance when a minor 17 or younger seeks an abortion. Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker called repeal, quote, essential, saying that the 1995 Act punished the most vulnerable pregnant minors, victims of rape and other abuse in unsafe homes, close quote. Once again, Illinois has established progressive policies on reproductive health. This past Thursday, the Florida legislature voted to ban abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, with no exception for rape and incest. It modeled the law after the Mississippi legislation. The bill is now on Governor Ron DeSantis's desk for a signature, and he publicly announced that he will sign it. Reproductive rights and reproductive justice, including the right to abortion, brings on challenges to democratic rights and principles of women's bodily autonomy and freedom. With challenges before us in our country to voting rights, right to sexual autonomy and freedom, right to sexual autonomy, freedom from sexual harassment in the workplace, and the right to live in a democratic nation are all being currently challenged. With that said, we invited 4 expert panelists to help us make sense of this particular social, political, and historical moment regarding reproductive justice, and to help us understand what a society without Roe will be like. Many of you in our audience have never lived in a post-Roe society, or even, without Roe. And so, I think our panelists can give us some insight on what that will be like. So let me introduce our 4 esteemed and expert panelists. They include representatives from activism, policy and legislation, and history. So first we have Dr. Toni M. For the past 40 years, Dr. M has worked tirelessly to make the voices of Black women heard on issues of reproductive justice. She is the president and CEO of Black Women for Reproductive Justice. Prior to assuming this position, she served as the executive director of the Chicago Abortion Fund for 7 years. She was the first woman of color to serve in this leadership position. Under her leadership, CAF, the Chicago Abortion Fund, gained national recognition as one of the premier abortion funds in the Midwest. Dr. M was also one of the founding members of Women of African Descent for Reproductive Justice, a group of Black women who came together in July 1994 and organized a full-page signature ad in the Washington Post and roll call, demanding Congress include a full spectrum of reproductive healthcare services, including abortion, in any proposed national healthcare package. This ad represented the collective strength of 835 Black women around the country. And it was the members of Women of African Descent who coined the term reproductive justice in 1994. This group also republished the much celebrated We Remember brochure that voiced Black women's support of reproductive health and choices. I do want to say in 2008, Dr. M was part of a group of reproductive health rights and justice advocates who met with members of President Obama's transition team about advancing reproductive health and rights. Her personal experiences, knowledge, and understanding of the true meaning of reproductive justice and equality in its broadest sense was the impetus for her co-founding the African American Women Evolving, which is now known as Black Women for Reproductive Justice. Thank you, Dr. M, for your participation on our panel. Next is State Representative Kelly Cassidy. Representative Cassidy is the state legislator for the 14th district in the Illinois House, which encompasses Chicago neighborhoods of Edgewater and Rogers Park. She co-authored and sponsored the Reproductive Health Act in the State House, which solidified that all forms of reproductive health care are fundamental rights and codifies current medical practice standards. The bill expanded reproductive health care and removed decades of old criminal penalties against physicians performing abortions, along with spousal consent laws and waiting periods that were in the Illinois statute. Although these laws have been ruled unconstitutional, with the possibility of Roe v. Wade being overturned, the Reproductive Health Act corrected Illinois statutes to reflect current medical practices related to reproductive health care. Ms. Cassidy said publicly, quote, "With recent appointments to the Supreme Court and constant threats from the federal government to overturn our rights, our fight for choice and bodily autonomy are more important than ever." Before Ms. Cassidy joined the state legislature, she worked as an organizer, a legislative director, and she is a mom. She has spent the past 20 years living her values, which includes fighting for the rights of women and the LGBTQ community as an activist. She's also worked for a smarter criminal justice system and ensured that her 3 sons have safe spaces to play in their community. Representative Cassidy has devoted the past 20 years of her career to making government more accessible, efficient, and effective. Next, I want to introduce Mrs. Diana Parker Kafka, who since July 2020 has been the executive director of the Midwest Access Coalition, a nonprofit Chicago organization that provides support services to women seeking abortion care. Services within MAC include helping women with transportation and transportation costs, coordinating travel and other needs such as lodging, food, medicine, and emotional support. Midwest Action Coalition depends on volunteers and provides services in 12 states throughout the Midwest, including Illinois. Before she became executive director of MAC, Mrs. Parker Kafka spent years as an organizer and supporter of Chicago-based progressive organizations that uphold an individual's right to access high-quality health care. Before becoming executive director, she was the director of strategic partnerships at MAC. She has been deeply involved in organizing and providing client-centered care at various organizations, and she has helped to build connections and opportunities for resource sharing and future collaboration among funds and clinics in the abortion access space across the Midwest. Mrs. Parker Kafka has noted that, quote, "Connection, collaboration, and growth among practical support organizations is critical to building a better future at this complicated moment in the movement," close quote. Finally, we have Dr. Leslie Regan, professor of history, medicine, gender and women's studies, and law at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. Dr. Regan has authored 2 books about abortion, one that I am currently reading and I highly recommend, called "When Abortion Was a Crime: Women, Medicine, and Law in the United States, 1867 to 1973. Published in 1996, this book tells the social history and account of the criminalization of abortion, while also tracing changing attitudes with medicine and everyday life, starting in the late 19th century up to when Roe v. Wade made abortion legal and a constitutional right in 1973. Dr. Regan's second book, titled "Dangerous Pregnancies, Mothers, Disabilities, and Abortion in Modern America, tells the story of the German measles epidemic in the United States in the early 1960s and the anxiety it created, particularly about pregnancy. Dr. Regan's areas of specialty include the history of medicine, American women's history, and sexuality. And she has been published in a variety of scholarly journals, including the Bulletin of the History of Medicine, American Journal of Public Health, and Journal of American History. And her book, When Abortion Was a Crime, received numerous awards, including the President's Award for the Social Science History Association, the Law and Society Association's James Willard Hertz Prize for Best Book in Legal History, and the Choice Outstanding Book of the Year. She is also a member of the ACLU Champaign County Steering Committee. Let us all give a warm welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you. Okay, so to start us off with the discussion, I'd like to ask each of you to provide and give us your thoughts about this historical moment that we are currently living in regarding reproductive rights and reproductive justice from your perspective. So Dr. Bond, I'm going to ask you to give us your perspective and thoughts on this.
Certainly. First, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this important discussion. I have missed doing work in Chicago. Real quickly, I did co-found and lead the Chicago-based Black Women for Reproductive Justice for 15 years. BWRJ unfortunately had to close its doors in 2011 because of lack of funding. I'm also the co-founder and board chair of a national organization called Interfaith Voices for Reproductive Justice that works with religious leaders, religious scholars, and RJ activists at the intersections of religion and reproductive justice. And I'm currently based in Las Vegas, still doing reproductive justice work, and also as adjunct faculty at Claremont School of Theology, and also at Methodist Theological School of Ohio, where I teach classical and Christian ethics. As an RJ activist and religious scholar, I'm clear that we're living in a moment of a political moment, still, of tyranny and fascism. We have a democratic administration, but that administration still walked into the mess left by the previous administration. And let me unpack what I mean by this. There's a frightening and, quite frankly, xenophobic resolve still to take America back from those who are racially and ethnically different, people of color, and also from the LGBT plus community and or those who are not Christian. There's also this unquenchable bloodthirst for the complete domination and control over the lives of people within the US, especially women, people of color, immigrants, the LGBT plus communities, and every other vulnerable population. So if there was ever a time for those of us who are doing work as RJ activists and progressive thinking people of faith to step into the public square, it's right now. And frankly, I think we need to be sounding the alarm loudly, particularly when we think about the law that was passed in Texas around abortion. It wasn't just a ban on trying to ban abortion, but it was also an attempt to indict and punish individuals who would help people to get abortion. And we're seeing those kinds of similar laws, attempts to pass those similar laws across the country. So we should be very concerned. At the same time, reproductive justice theory is used to transform and to highlight and transform power inequities and to challenge systemic racism and white supremacy, and to create long-term systemic change. So for RJ activists, this isn't just about abortion. We recognize that this is about a much larger effort to control the reproductive lives of individuals in every area possible. And it's also connected with an attempt to take away people's civil liberties and civil rights. And so there's a connection between the attacks on voter rights and reproductive justice. So we need to be looking at this very, very broadly. And also to understand that many of these attempts to take away the reproductive and civil rights of individuals is grounded in this anti-choice conservative theological frame that promotes anti-LGBT plus GT plus rhetoric and the promotion of Christianity as the one and only true religion in the US, and the continued subjugation of women and girls through measures designed to control our reproduction and our sexuality. So I think that that we have to recognize that we are in still a politically hostile climate where women and girls and LGBT plus communities and immigrants are the most vulnerable, and that the opposition is still very much emboldened by the previous administration, because anti-choice legislators are using religion as a weapon of oppression, particularly in Southern and rural communities, to usurp individual human rights, especially around areas of reproductive and sexual health. And that is why I'm so very glad that when I think about my home state of Illinois and the advances that, led by efforts of Representative Cassidy and the Illinois state legislature to pass the Illinois Reproductive Health Act and the repeal of the parental notification notice, that Illinois is really stepping up to become what it will have to be, unfortunately, which is a sanctuary state. And so I'll leave it there, and I look forward to the comments of my esteemed colleagues on the panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Cassidy, your thoughts?
Thanks. I was having a little trouble with the unmute button there. Thank you so much. And I'm really thrilled to be part of this panel and have admired Dr. Bond for a very long time. So it's a pleasure to be here and to share thoughts on this issue. The reality is my whole life has been almost defined by the battle for reproductive freedom. When I was born, my mother had to cross state lines to give birth to me because our closest hospital was a Catholic one and wouldn't give her the hysterectomy her doctor recommended at the time of my birth. So I ended up being born in Philadelphia when the rest of my family was born in New Jersey. And I was born just 5 years before Roe. So really, I have heard, and now for the better part of my adult life, been part of these battles to preserve our rights. I started my career here in Illinois working for the National Organization for Women in Chicago. And you referenced the Parental Notice of Abortion Act that passed. That was one of the last and really deep hit losses that we took while I was working there. So it was a very personal thing for me to be part of the repeal of the PNA. But the work on the Reproductive Health Act was it was really an amazing experience. Getting folks to understand, as you mentioned, all of these things that were found unconstitutional were still on the statutes, like zombies waiting to rise when Roe fell. And, for many, many years through my career, I would say if, but for the last 5 years or so, I've been saying when. And unfortunately, I think we're very, very close to that. So I'm so gratified that we were able to pass the RHA, thankful to the amazing array of advocates that were part of that, to my fellow legislators. I always have to give a shout out to the first term women who would not take no for an answer, who went into then Speaker Madigan and threatened to shut everything down unless we got an opportunity to vote on the Reproductive Health Act. A lot of our colleagues were not eager to take this vote. They were still worried about political repercussions from House Bill 40 and did not believe that there was really a threat. They really thought, I mean, the words hysterical and hyperbolic were used to explain away or dismiss our concerns and our eagerness to get it over the finish line. And it's significant. The RHA is significant in a lot of ways, but two really important ones, in addition to what you mentioned about getting those zombies out, is, prior to the passage of the RHA, everything regulating abortion in Illinois was found in the criminal code. And at that time I talked about, if you landed here from Mars and you just wanted to figure something out, you would never find it, because you would think, looking for a healthcare related issue in our statutes, you would look in the healthcare codes, but instead it was in the criminal codes, which really set the tone for how we handle this, and it's not as a healthcare procedure. But another really significant piece that doesn't often get cited was removing all gendered language from our laws around abortion. I spent a good solid 3 hours in hearings late at night in May of 2019, being questioned about why it was important to do that. And my response repeatedly was, anyone with a uterus can get pregnant. And I think it's really important that we are mindful of that. In fact, I'm going back this year and looking at other kinds of healthcare codes that have gendered language in them that could trip up folks when looking for insurance coverage if their gender markers don't match their anatomy. And so that was a huge and hard fought change to our law to ensure that when we talk about reproductive justice and reproductive health access, we're talking about everyone who needs it. And that's something that I'm really proud we were able to get done. But the attacks keep coming. We watched as we were trying to get the Reproductive Health Act across the finish line. We watched around the country as states were implementing laws like Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama. Were all engaged in the same activities and exercises to put more restrictions in place. We've seen now what Texas has done, and we responded with the Texas Act here in Illinois, the expanding Access to Abortion Services Act, to really turn the Texas model on its head and make it about ensuring that the folks who are coming here from out of state to the sanctuary we have built have the supports they need. And that's something I'm committed to finding a path to. And I think I've gone over time, so I want to make sure we have time for everyone and for questions. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Wow. Okay, Mrs. Parker Kafka, how will you respond? And you are an activist and you are actually seeing what's happening on the ground. So definitely tell us about what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's hard to describe what's happening since we are seeing we support people throughout the whole Midwest, and a lot is happening in every state. But most of the states in the Midwest are pretty hostile to abortion care. So it's been a very complex landscape developing over the past few years. But first I wanted to thank you for thinking of MAC to talk about the reality of the day-to-day of what it's like to navigate the abortion access landscape alongside some true reproductive choice legends. We're really honored. So a year ago, we were seeing about 30 to 40 abortion seekers needing support with their abortion journey, traveling to, from, or within the Midwest. That included 61 clinics, most of which are independent providers, but also about 24 Planned Parenthoods. Most people were coming to Illinois. As you said, we have been a sanctuary state for some time. Most of our clients are women, but not everybody who needs abortion care identifies as a woman. So I'll be referring to clients and or abortion seekers. So now, a year later, we're supporting about 110 to 120 people each month. Each month, each of our clients is paired with an experienced, dedicated coordinator that develops an, albeit remote, relationship over the phone with people to understand the unique complexities of their life and the barriers that have been put up between their life and their abortion provider. Our numbers have always increased as we've developed more and more relationships with clinics across the country. But the past couple of years have been really rough. COVID and growing inequity due to policies made by people who don't struggle with hunger, housing, childcare, unemployment, debt, segregation, or over-policing. For instance, most of our clients are parents, and losing the ability to send kids to school or afford childcare during COVID because of massive unemployment made it difficult for them to be able to even think about making a long distance journey for some essential healthcare. But the biggest reason for the most recent spike is SB8, that law in Texas that effectively removes bodily autonomy for people who can get pregnant. Texans now are going to a few surrounding states, including Kansas and the Midwest. So while those clinics are doing so much to provide more care, we're now supporting Kansas that have had to travel to Illinois for care because their clinics have been booked out for weeks due to taking care of Texans because of SB8. The Trump administration inflicted a lot of trauma that continues today. Many of his allies are still in power. He packed the courts with anti-choice judges who have successfully allowed Texas to violate federal law, the rights of bodily autonomy, for 5 months now. And this happened and continues to happen with Biden in office and a Democratic Senate majority. So while we voted and had some gains, it hasn't yet had a positive impact on abortion access or the lives of the communities we serve. Abortion funds like MAC even lost some foundational support because there was a sense that things would be okay now. But as you know, the Supreme Court, which isn't going to be reformed, is likely to make it far, far worse by allowing about 26 more states to effectively ban abortion with laws copying Texas's law, or with their own trigger laws that have been waiting for Judge Amy Coney Barrett. 9 of these states are Midwest states. So it's hard to look at this landscape and have hope for ourselves and our communities, but as abolitionist and teacher Miriam Kaba said, hope is a discipline and we've got to get good at it if we want to envision and fight for something better. I'm very, very lucky to be from and live in Illinois. I'm grateful for everyone who called their representatives and demanded they support the RHA, that Rep Cassidy, who is my rep. I was born and raised in Rogers Park and currently still live here, best neighborhood in Chicago, who sponsored and championed, as well as my colleagues in the RHA Coalition, many of whom also made sure Medicaid in Illinois helps pay for essential abortion care. And more recently, that young people wouldn't have to unsafely notify unsupported guardians whenever they need abortion care, starting in July. As a result, we are one of the safest states for people who might need abortion care, and we're going to need to be there for our neighbors as much as we can. Midwest Access Coalition has co-founded a national organization called Apiary that supports organizations like ours, collective small groups that want to focus on the difficult work of planning safe travel for abortion care, especially as we're going to see a rise in long distance care for all gestational care. If we truly believe that there's a right for everybody to determine their own futures and be in total control of our bodies, we need to continue to build what we need for everybody. That not only includes people born into privilege and access, but Black and Brown women, trans and non-binary folks, fat people, immigrants, people without resources, people with drug dependency, people under 18, everyone for whom the institutions in this country aren't being built for, haven't been built for, because we will be the ones impacted the most by the SB8s and the increasing amount of trigger laws and track laws, which are the laws that are written to regulate abortion providers out of existence. And as well as the violent rhetoric and physical threats made by the anti-choice movement. A Planned Parenthood recently went up in flames. This is not a good landscape for providers and allies of folks that need abortion care. But I will end there so the last speaker can talk and we can start answering questions.
Thank you. Let me just ask, where did a Planned Parenthood facility go up in flames?
Tennessee.
In Tennessee.
And it was considered arson. Yeah.
I also want to mention, I happened to see an article in yesterday's New York Times looking at data from Texas about abortion, and from what they see so far is women are either, well, leaving the state for their abortions, or they are taking the abortion pill. That I think was the first study of what has been done since this Texas law was legislated. Okay, Dr. Regan, as a historian, how do you see what's going on?
Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here and see all of you. Thank you so much to the Center for Chicago Women's History and the Chicago Public Library. It is wonderful that it's coming through the library. And everything that everyone's already said, I'm so glad you've said it. I agree with everything that you're saying. It's so important, and it's so connected to voting rights and the political context that we're living in and what we need to do. But as a historian who studied the 100 years of illegal abortion in the United States and focused especially on Chicago and Illinois, I of course, like you, look at what's coming from the Supreme Court with great concern. It's extremely distressing to know. We know what it was like when it was illegal in the United States. It won't be identical, but a lot of things we can see will be come back into play. And Illinois and California and are amazing. But some of this will be happening here, and especially since we know the anti-abortion movement isn't going to give up. We're going to try to have sanctuary cities for fetuses, and we have to make sure that we keep what has been won in this state. But what we can expect is, when you criminalize abortion, you make the women who are seeking abortions and people who are pregnant who are seeking abortions into criminals. It means you make doctors, nurses, midwives, anyone who helps perform an abortion, a criminal. And anyone who gives information, we could see with the Texas law, people who provide money, people who drive to help. It depends how those are written, but if it's anyone who helps with an abortion, lots of people become criminals. On top of that, of course, I'm blanking on the name, but anyway, there's research that shows there are thousands of laws on the books throughout the country that will come into play that make fetuses into persons. And those laws, if they go into effect, are incredibly dangerous in terms of individual rights, until the rights of people who are pregnant and mothers. Of course, we've already seen some of this, but this is something I don't think people necessarily know much about. But from the history, we can expect that police and prosecutors will go back to the methods they used before. A lot of those are going to be used, and as we are decarcerating to some degree and understanding what the criminalization of drugs has meant, this will be a new incarceration of masses of people, and they will be primarily Black and brown. But the methods that they used, whether they go after women, the laws are saying, they're saying, oh no, we're not going after women, we're only going after providers in Texas. And what I learned from my research is you don't have to arrest the person who has an abortion. You do not have to incarcerate her or prosecute her or them. they will be punished. And the ways that that will happen is through the process of investigation and prosecution. That is that police and prosecutors will interrogate anyone they suspect of having had an abortion, collect information, insist on answers being given to them under threat of no care or of jail or of prosecution. We can also expect that physicians, nurses, and hospital staff will also, oh gosh, it already tells me I'm done. They will be threatened with prosecution if they do not assist the state in collecting that information by interrogating women, people who are pregnant. Hospitals will be reporting patients to police. There will be forced gynecological examinations under police surveillance. There will be entrapment, raids on clinics and gathering, everyone who's there with the aim of capturing everyone who's there to get an abortion or in the middle of an abortion or after an abortion. These were all things that were done in the past. They are horrific. I can tell you that when I was reading the Supreme Court, the Illinois State Supreme Court case where it was Mrs. Stanko who was arrested for performing abortions in Chicago in 1940, and they arrested 8 or 9 women and forced them, they had to go through gynecological exams under police surveillance, and the doctor removed a catheter, a rubber, short wire that was used in medicine that's used to induce a miscarriage, removed one from each person, and that became evidence. I was so upset when I discovered this. I was stomping around the archives in rage to think of this happening. So, it won't happen to everyone everywhere. It depends on local prosecutors, but we already know that local prosecutors in some states have set up programs in conjunction with hospitals to arrest women who have passed illegal drugs to their fetus in utero, and they've been prosecuted and jailed. And this has happened in every state, including Illinois. But certainly it was a program in North or South Carolina. Sorry for whoever is the wrong state that I'm saying. So there is plenty more to say about what the consequences will be. And although Illinois is protected, it's going to be heavily impacted with people coming in. I mean, we could have people try and do the same thing in terms of the law, but also we are going to have lots of people coming to the state, as they did in the past, to get abortions, to get birth control, to get the health care that they need. And Guttmacher just did a study, and they suggested, so California is a big deal. It's 5,000% increase. Illinois, 9,000% increase they're expecting. So what we really have to do is figure out how we're going to provide those abortions. Anyway, that's a whole thing, is to have more providers. And I don't remember now if Illinois changed the law in terms of midwives and nurses, whether they can perform abortions, but that is really important. Good. Yes. Representative saying yes. Very important across the country to expand.
Not all, but
yeah, but to expand potential providers. So I will stop, and I look forward to any questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you. One point I just want to make about the anti-abortion movement too is there seems to be a collaboration between the anti-abortion movement and the white supremacist movement. And there was recently a march here in Chicago that was anti-abortion joined by white supremacists. So, and it makes sense that they would join forces when you think about it. But that's, yeah, one more thing. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna go to the questions from our audience. And the first question that I think is for Representative Cassidy is, why is Illinois one of the few states in the Midwest? And correct me if I'm wrong, I think Illinois is the only state in the Midwest protecting safe and legal abortions.
Yeah, we are. We're very much, in a lot of ways, we're an island of blue and a sea of red. So that's, it's really, electoral outcomes make all the difference in the world. That summer after we passed the RHA and a lot of other great laws, I lost count of how many times I said what a difference a governor makes. Having supermajorities in both chambers as well as a Democratic governor made it possible to build that firewall around our state.
Thank you. Here's a question that I think is very interesting, because I've been also thinking about this. Can the panelists discuss the prospect of losing the 2 contested Illinois Supreme Court races in 2022 to anti-choice extremists, and all of our progress over the last few decades being completely wiped out? And so Representative Cassidy, yeah.
The implications around reproductive health, it goes well beyond that. There are so many of the progressive policies that our state has enacted over the last 10 years or more really have been buttressed by our Supreme Court. But we've got these 2 seats up. It's the first time in 30 years that we've redrawn our Supreme Court maps. People don't even think about the fact that we elect Supreme Court justices in this state. People don't pay attention to those races. It's really, this is the most critical thing on our ballot this year, is ensuring that we hold on to these 2 seats, because that is all that stands between us and losing every bit of progress, whether we're talking about abortion access or marriage equality or the anti-bullying and anti-conversion therapy laws and things like that. All of these pieces, pretty much every law I pass has somebody lined up to challenge it. And I have always been very comfortable in the knowledge that our Supreme Court had our backs. But with these 2 races, it's critically important. So there's a northern suburban district and a western suburban district, and those we have to hold those. The implications would be disastrous, because these are 10-year terms. This is not a quick thing. This will have a generational impact if we lose these seats.
My goodness. Let me ask another question on those lines. If Roe is overturned, can the Supreme Court pressure states like Illinois to disband its legislation protecting safe and legal abortions?
We don't need the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't need to have any influence. The advocates on the opposite side of the issue are going to be lining up to file lawsuits against all of this stuff. So there's not necessarily a correlation other than sort of the national trend. And as you said, we are the only pro-choice island in the Midwest. So the focus will be on taking us down.
Okay, another question. How much of this banning of abortion do you think is racially based? And anybody that wants to speak to that?
I'll speak to that first. I mean, certainly, as we know that this is racially based. As white people become a minority in this nation, we are seeing anti-choice conservative legislators carrying out their plan, which has been in the works for the past several years, to restrict abortion access in states, especially in the South, as a strategy to overturn Roe v. Wade. And at the same time, as we see the population of white people decrease and populations of Black, Indigenous people of color increase, we're also now seeing the redistricting, right? Southern states like Florida and Georgia and Texas and North Carolina have become likely targets for partisan and racial gerrymandering as conservatives seek to block Black, Indigenous people from exercising their right to vote. So this is most definitely tied to race. The other thing that I would say is, as we talk about losing Roe, let us be clear that for years, Roe has not been a reality for Black, Indigenous people of color owing to the Hyde Amendment, which comes from the late Representative Henry Hyde from Illinois. So yes, I think there's this fear that Roe could be overturned, but the reality is that that's why we have abortion funds who stepped in to stand in the gap, and groups like Midwest Access Coalition, who were created to help provide practical support to people to get the necessary abortion care that they need. So while on the one hand, yes, there's this fear of Roe being overturned, but we also need to sit with the reality that Hyde made Roe impossible for BIPOC communities, and the role that the reproductive rights movement played in making Black, Indigenous people of color the trade-off to protect Roe. So we have to hold that history too.
I'll also point out that when we do see news of someone criminalized for self-managed abortion or miscarriage management, it's almost always a person of color. The person who was arrested in Oklahoma was Indigenous, Kirby was an immigrant. And so we also are seeing people criminalized, Black people criminalized for not knowing that they couldn't vote and trying to register and being sentenced to years and years of prison. So there's always a win-win situation for antis in when it comes to these laws. They can try to stop the decrease of the white population in this country, as well as criminalize people of color for it.
Leslie, did you want to get it?
Yes, thank you for those comments from Dr. Bond and Ms. Parker Kafka. I want to also add, yes, I mean, it absolutely is about race. The anti-abortion or racism, the anti-abortion movement, there's a great study that shows much of their imagery and rhetoric. It is about the imagined fetus, the imagined baby that's being lost, that they are trying to save, is a white baby, a white male baby. And really it is so much part of this evangelical imagery of, I mean, there are images where it looks like Jesus in a little nest, you know, the way it is. So it is absolutely imagined as saving white babies. Absolutely, we know that the anti-abortion movement and the fascist groups that Dr. Bond referred to, they don't care about cruelty, pain, and suffering. We are living, you know, we've been living with an acceptance of that for a long time, and it just doesn't matter to them. But the roots of the criminal abortion laws in the 19th century also come out of the same concern about a changing population and the possibility that the white upper crust Protestant Yankee class would lose power to immigrants, to just Chinese, Asian, Catholic, and to African Americans, especially the newly freed people. So it was very much directed at preventing abortions by the people they could see who were having them, who were middle-class married white women going to clinics that were quite open in New York and other cities. So yeah, I think that's all I need to say at the moment. Thank you. Well, I want to say something about miscarriage, but I don't know if now's good or if I can come back later.
Oh, well, if you want to say it now.
Sure, but I just want, in case somebody else want to jump in. So thank you for bringing that up. I had meant to say, we do have people who are being prosecuted for miscarriage now. This was also part of the past, is anyone who came in and who said, they were miscarrying, doctors, nurses, staff were taught not to believe them. So throughout, they're being taught in OB-GYN, you can't trust women. You can't trust them. Don't trust them. They lie. And they treat them that way. They're lying. They're not trustworthy. They're not being treated as patients with respect. Obviously, there are differences by class, but this could happen to anybody. All classes experience this if they came into the ER, and they would question them and insist, "Tell me who did it. Who was the abortionist? Where was it done? What did they do? And who's the father? Who got you pregnant?" There is a woman who I happened to see her obituary. This happened to her in 1963 in New Jersey. She's a middle-class married mother, and they kept questioning her. They would not believe that she was in the middle of a miscarriage, and she had delivered a 5-month fetus, and she sat there for hours with a fetus between her legs waiting as they insisted that they were bringing in the police and interrogated her. She became one of the founders of a New Jersey pro-choice organization, later in the 70s. But this went on all the way from the 1900s up through the 70s, and it's being revived in certain ways.
Dr. Singleton, if I could just offer to, I saw in the chat, there was some comments about the connection between anti-choice activists and white supremacists. And I just wanted to offer that has been a strategy of anti-choice religious conservatives from the start, this connection between anti-choice movement and white supremacy. But here's where it's important to recognize their ulterior motives of conservative evangelicals and fundamentalists are centered around protecting the unborn as a response to legalizing abortion. It was, but the real rub was that their true motive has to be traced back to 1979, when one of its leaders, Paul Weyrich, used abortion not for moral reasons, but to rally religious supporters behind efforts to keep then President Jimmy Carter from winning a second term, because they didn't want him to protect school segregation. And of course, they couldn't use that as their rallying cry. And so they chose abortion because they believed it was a religious crusade they could effectively organize religious people around. So that is the connection between anti-choice conservatism, religious conservatism, and white supremacy, which is why some of us who do work at the intersections of religion and reproductive justice say we've really got to begin to recognize this thread that connects the two.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. Can the panelists discuss how the use of medication obtained through the mail may be a double-edged sword, enabling pregnant persons to conduct an abortion, but also enabling greater surveillance by government actors? Anybody?
I'm happy to jump in. I'm just assuming kind of other people might have more to say. But yeah, I think it makes it possible for surveillance. I also think, just as we have fake clinics now, fake crisis pregnancy clinics that are right next to, Planned Parenthood or everywhere, anyway, to bring people in who don't know and trick them into thinking they're getting a pregnancy test, and sometimes lie to them about the consequences of those tests so that it becomes too late to have an abortion if that's what they had wanted to do. We'll have fake, websites with medication pills. I mean, Plan C campaign, which I put in there, is a very good organization, and they will tell you how to get pills, and they provide. But if we have fake clinics, we're going to have fake websites. and they will give misinformation. We have misinformation. There will be more misinformation. There may be selling or giving of fake pills in order to prevent abortions. So we're going to have to figure out how to guard against that. I mean, we have such a problem in terms of information and communication. And of course, the people who are educated, the people who are knowledgeable, people who have somebody who gives them information will be able to find ways. But the people who don't have that information, or, who know that if their parents find out, or their spouse or their partner finds out, and that they will be subject to violence, they're the most likely to be harmed as a result of misinformation. I mean, I think in Illinois, we could see misinformation where teens learn, oh, it's illegal. No, it's not actually. It is not illegal. It won't be illegal in Illinois. But certainly the national information, actually, we already know that some people think it already is illegal because of the way it is being covered. Although it is gone. Roe is already gone in Texas, and it is gone for a lot of people. So yeah, I don't have an answer, but I know there's hackers and people out there who could help us.
I think this is something that a sector of the abortion access movement is focused on. We rely on an organization called Digital Defense Fund, which is specifically about how to keep your information secure. How do you work in abortion care, keeping your information secure and the people that you're supporting secure. So MAC is we have a dedicated tech team that is just really on top from the beginning, has been really on top of making sure that our practices are secure, how we keep information, how we get rid of the information, how we automatically anonymize information. But this is an issue where we're dealing with a governmental landscape of very increased surveillance. And also just disregard of rule for the law, as we see in Texas. This is they're going to do anything they want, and they're going to find a reason, or they're going to find a SCOTUS to let them do that. So I really encourage people to visit Digital Defense Fund to just get some guidance around what they even should be doing in their day-to-day lives to keep their information secure when they're just doing things that are day-to-day and have involvement around their healthcare as well.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to jump in? Okay, the next question is to Leslie Regan. Based on your history, knowledge, expertise, do you think that the US Supreme Court will decide abortion rights are to be determined by states, or do you think that the court will decide that life begins at conception with implications for both abortion and contraception?
Well, that's an interesting question. I am not much of a Supreme Court watcher, to be honest. I mean, I am watching it, but I really argue that, it's not the courts, it's the movements and the demand of abortion from women for 100 years and the acceptance of abortion that ultimately resulted in Roe versus Wade. The Supreme Court did not do this all by itself out of the blue, although the anti-abortion movement makes that argument. People were openly performing and providing abortions, even though it was completely against the law. And there was certainly concern that the law was just going, there would be no respect for law. And it had been legalized in several states. So as to what the court is going to do, I mean, I think the question in front of them is not, and I'm also not a lawyer, so is it really about a state law and not about the definition of life? I mean, I think they're capable of anything. They've been put there for a reason. And, they may get cases that allow them to do it. I think it's more likely, they may just outright overturn it. But I suspect there is also, concern, and there may be their political friends and influencers may be saying, don't quite do that. Gut it. Make it impossible, allow states to basically criminalize abortion. but say that, Roe is still preserved, because this decision has been essential for the Republican Party.
Mhm.
Being able to fight and name abortion, and of course, abortion, those fights always included being anti-birth control, being anti-gay, and we're seeing it now in the attacks on, the mother who has a trans child and gets I don't remember, gets her child healthcare. So those have always been deeply related, and the Republican Party has succeeded with it since Regan. And if they don't have it, it's going to make it a lot harder. Anyway, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they say Roe still exists. I am quite sure it will not exist. And it's very important for us to make that clear. Even if they say it exists, if it's okay in a case of rape or incest, or if that is what they end up with, that was true when abortion was a crime. When abortion was illegal pre-1973, it was called a therapeutic abortion. Those were legal, performed by doctors because they thought it was medically justified. And most places it wasn't written down as to what those indications were. But if that's what we end up with to save a woman's life or her health, then it's illegal. We are back in the era of criminalized abortion, because that was always the case. Catholic doctors, Catholic priests, the church objected to doing abortions to save a pregnant woman's life. But the vast majority of the medical profession, and of course lawyers, they're Protestants. Their belief was quite different. Yes, that was justified.
And
Thank you for
I'll
the
just
question.
I'll just quickly say that in my talks so as a practical support organization, there's a lot of legal issues that we are trying to figure out. And so we're convening roundtables with the repro legal world. And for my conversations with Center for Reproductive Rights, they're not quite sure if the Supreme Court will allow the 15-week ban, or if they'll just outright say it's up to the states to decide when viability is, which could be, conception for most of them. And that's what the anti-choice movement is trying to get at. They're going to try to say that a 15-week ban is reasonable, but as we've seen, the people arguing that case have told the Supreme Court, just ban abortion completely. That's what we really want. They've made it clear that that's what their goal is. And so I think that's where we're just going to end up there anyway, no matter what the language is that they decide is palatable for people. They're essentially going to ban abortion like they did in Texas and Missouri. By the way, Missouri has effectively banned the majority of abortions in the state for years.
Well, I can't believe it's 3:15, and I'm going to ask one more question from the audience and then ask the panelists to make some closing remarks, comments. This question is for Representative Cassidy. What do you think is the likelihood of rape being claimed more often if that is one of the ways that people can get access to abortion? And how do you think that will impact men? And let me just say, in a lot of states with restrictions, abortion is denied even in cases of rape and incest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the first part of this. The second part is, reporting a rape, reporting a sexual assault is also no walk in the park for a victim. And so, it really is a rock and a hard place. We would also, I would expect to see some requirements of police reports, perhaps even proof, before that would be an acceptable reason in a fully restricted state. So, even if that were a viable path, that's a viable path that puts you at further trauma, because our system of dealing with sexual assault survivors is very often re-traumatizing. So I don't know that many would volunteer for that either.
Thank you.
Could I say something to that?
Oh, absolutely.
So, some states, I mean, I don't know what the laws are and what might happen in all the different states by any means, but this was something when California passed a reform law. The goal of the reform law passed in 1967 was to make it easier for doctors to perform abortions, to make it more accessible. And it was for health reasons, for rape. I don't know if they put in incest, but they didn't allow, they didn't go along with if there were fetal defects. So the intention was to make it easier to provide abortions. The result with the rape cases was that if someone said they were raped, they'd say, well, depending on where they lived, right? The police or the sheriff, well, I didn't get any report of a rape. And then they would be doing these investigations. So that kind of thing is not helpful. You have to simply accept and believe what women and people who are pregnant say about their lives. They don't have to give a reason. If they have determined, I mean, and I guess we need to say that a lot more often, right? If they have determined that for whatever reason, they are not ready, they are not able, they do not want to carry a pregnancy to term, then we have to accept that. They know better than anyone else, their capacity, their health, the outcome. And, asking someone to carry a pregnancy is not just about their body. It is their body. It's in their body. It affects their health. It is more dangerous to deliver a child than to have an abortion. But, when people are pregnant, they take care of it. There is no viable fetus without the human being carrying them. They make decisions to take vitamins, to go to the doctor. They do so much to make sure that they have viable, healthy children. And this is true of the people who are treated as the worst mothers, and I'm putting that in quotes, who are addicted to narcotics. They try to stop in order to protect the fetus. So their future baby. So anyway, that's taking me away from rape, but it is not helpful to have laws, to have anything that says, well, it's okay if they say they've been raped, because they just will turn that around into attacking the person who says they were raped or that they were assaulted. And no one should have to give information or prove it or go to the law if they don't want to. As to men are equally involved in pregnancy. Mm-hmm. Men have been involved in abortion forever, helping women, helping to pay for it, all the rest. If they are thought to be threatening or that they won't be helpful, then we don't talk to them. I mean, this is bad for anyone who's it's bad for health, for everybody, and for sexual freedom. Because in terms of patients' rights, it's very dangerous for everyone. It is not just about abortion at all.
I think that's a wonderful way to wrap up this session. And let me ask for final comments from any of our panelists. Dr. Bond, do you have any final comments you want to make?
Thank you, Dr. Singleton. I do. And I think it's so very important that we, the question that we have to ask ourselves, right, is how can we begin to do this work much more expansively across the three movements: reproductive health, reproductive rights, and reproductive justice? Because it's three separate movements, but we need all to successfully counter the gains realized by anti-choice religious conservatives. And so we really need to begin to think about what does it mean to create cultural and narrative shifts in the public square that offer an alternative understanding of human reproduction and sexuality that's grounded in reproductive justice theory and that respects individual beliefs. Because as anti-choice conservatives push Christian exceptionalism, which is rooted in white supremacy, that makes it much more difficult for us to continue doing this work in the singular way that we have been, because this is about so much more than just abortion. It is about trying to systematically take away the rights of any individual who wants to exercise any semblance of autonomy over their lives, and also to directly continue policing and controlling the bodies of Black, Indigenous people of color.
Thank you. Representative Cassidy.
I first of all, just thank you all for being here. Thank you for caring enough about this issue to spend your Sunday afternoon with us. And please, I beg of you, do not sleep on these Supreme Court races. If we lose these races, I said this the other day, this is not hyperbole. Hellfire will rain down. All of our advances will be gone. So please get involved in those races. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Parker Kafka.
Yeah, I would really encourage people to talk to everybody they know about abortion care and why it's important. The word abortion is used 3 times more in public in materials by the anti-choice movement than ours. It's very hard to get Biden to say the word abortion as well. It's so stigmatized. And that's one of the biggest barriers we're facing to change the culture in this country when it comes to abortion access. So please talk to people, wear merch that says abortion on it even. Go to We Testify or Shout Your Abortion to read about stories from people who have gotten abortion care and why it's important to them. Sources onto people. Be really annoying about it. Like, my friends hear about abortion constantly. It's basically my personality. So make it a part of your personality. Talk to people about abortion.
Thank you. And Dr. Regan.
I thought I just gave my big statement. There's a lot. I'm so glad to be here. And yes, I mean, we didn't really get to about talking about abortion more. I really, in my research, felt like everyone had had an abortion in the past. Everybody certainly knows someone who has had an abortion. And I believe I've seen somewhere a t-shirt, everyone loves someone who has had an abortion. And I guess I would add, we have all, whether we have actually had a procedure of an abortion or not, and this includes men, we have all used abortion because we all knew that it's there if needed. And when it's legal and safe, we all know it's legal and safe. And unfortunately, of course, people didn't know for sure they had it because of money. But most of us have used abortion, even if we never needed it, because we knew it was a backup. I used it as a backup. I knew it was there. And I also, so I think that's also something we could be saying, we knew if our birth control failed or if we, had health problems, this was available. And it is not only the 25 to 30% of women who've had abortions. It really is all of us.
Thank you, and thank you all. One last thing I'm going to ask the panelists to do, could you post your contact information in the chat in case people have other questions? And to everybody in the audience, you will get a recording of this session as well. I want to thank all of our panelists, Dr. Toni M, Representative Kelly Cassidy, Diana Parker Kafka, and Dr. Leslie Regan. Thank you so much for your participation on this issue. And I want to thank our audience for joining us this afternoon. And if you have additional questions, get in touch with the panelists. Chicago Public Libraries is going to cut us off at 3:30. So I'm gonna say goodbye to everybody and have a good rest of your week. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing it, for having us.
Absolutely. It was so fun. Thanks to all of you. And I'm glad you've been in communication with Beth about the honorariums. So if you have any other questions, you know how to contact me or Beth as well.
Well, thanks for organizing it. I will get in contact with Beth. Now that I'm back.
Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. This is wonderful. I wish I was in Chicago to see the display of my collection. If someone goes, take pictures and send it to me.
Yeah, that's so great.
Absolutely. That's
So
awesome.
maybe I will. That'll give me an excuse to get out more, Toni.
Please do. There's
Dr.
no way I can-
Bond,
Oh, thank you. Oh, Beth says she'll send me images. Thank
So
you
is this
much.
part of the public library? Is that where it
Yes,
is?
Chicago Public
Oh,
Library.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that collection.
It's an
Yeah, I'd like to
amazing
feature that in a newsletter for my office.
Yeah,
So
there was
I would
no
love
such
to-
thing when I did my research. So that is really great. Yes, thank you so much for organizing all of it.
And
Thank you all for
Toni, your
participating.
papers. I visited the papers twice and I can't wait for more.
Oh, that's great.
So important.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, let me not keep you any longer. Thank you.
Thank
Let's
you
all
all
everybody.
for your work.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.